Hey, do you have any fear of failure that your consulting or coaching business won't work out, or something that you're doing is just going to totally flop? We'll find out how to turn your whole view of failure around on today's episode of the Consulting Matters podcast. And welcome to the Consulting Matters podcast. This is the show for purpose-driven consultants and coaches who are ready to own the power of what they do and position themselves for greater impact and income. I'm your host, Betsy Jordan, and I am both a business mentor and a brand positioning and messaging strategist. And today we're going to talk about something that is different in terms of fear. So I've talked a lot about on the show about fears of visibility and being seen. I talked a lot about imposter syndrome because that's such a big deal that we consultants and coaches deal with. But today I want to get into a very specific type of fear, and that is about the fear of failure. And what do we do about it? Because it could really keep us from moving forward. I think that there's this global fear that we might have, especially when we're just getting started, is like, oh my gosh, what if I start this venture and it totally flops? And then we also have like these micro fears of like, well, what do I do if I try this one opportunity, or if I go for this niche and it doesn't work and I just fall flat on my face? Well, to help us out with that, I decided to invite Melisa Buie on the show, and she is super interesting. So she caught my eye when she posted about my client, Katie Anderson, who I've been working with for the past 4 years. And it was just so wonderful and so glowing. And I got more into what Melisa does. And so she's definitely an engineer and a problem solver in terms of the operational excellence standpoint. But she wrote a book that title alone just turned my head. It's called Faceplant, which I think is awesome. And Faceplant is all about freeing yourself from failure's funk. The title alone just made me decide to have her on the show. And what I really am excited about with this conversation that we're going to have, it's all about like, how do you reframe your understanding of failure so that you see it not as something that you need to avoid, but, these ongoing opportunities for learning. So super excited for you to hear the conversation. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Melisa.
Betsy, thanks for having me. I am so honored to be on the show today.
So, one of the things that just like caught my eye. So you and I have never met, but you wrote like this really nice LinkedIn post about Katie Anderson, who I've worked with for a while. And then I saw your book title, Faceplant, and I'm like, that is such a great title. So I'm like, I have to have you on the show. I'm so excited to have you here. So we really are just getting to know each other. Before we get into the whole conversation about failure and how to reframe our understanding of failure and how we create conditions where failure is not something that we're even like worried about, I'd love to talk a little bit more about your background. Like, so you have like a PhD in like engineering, and then you're this operational excellence leader. So people might be wondering, like, how did she become an expert in, failure? But before we get into that, let's talk about your background.
Okay. So I'll go way back and give you a like what motivated all of this. So I grew up on a farm, and farm kids are curious by nature. So there's always something to poke at or take apart or ask about. And I probably followed my father around asking why until he ran out of answers. But that curiosity is what eventually pulled me into science. But there's something else that was really driving me too. So we owned our farm, but money was always tight. And so my dad just kind of drilled into me that education was the way out of poverty. And my mom gave me this hunger for travel and adventure. So neither of them had done those things. But they passed it on, that wanting, to me. So I put my head down and fought my way through school, earned a PhD, and then landed in the semiconductor industry. And at that, like all through that time, failure was never on my radar. Like it was just not an option. That was not something that was going to happen. Um, and it was in my first job where I started running experiments, and I learned about this tool called design of experiments, which some people may know about this. But I started learning about really about experimentation and how to run experiments. And I just fell in love with experimentation. And I learned that in the lab, it doesn't matter whether an experiment works or whether it blows up in your face. Either way, you're going to learn something. And so failure in the lab, I was totally fine with. I was perfectly comfortable there. But if you fast forward into my mid 40s, I started my first business and it was a complete and utter failure. Nearly bankrupted me and I was gutted. And I remember thinking, okay, I'm not going to do that again. And that's when it hit me. I'd spent decades failing cheerfully in the lab, but the moment failure showed up in actual life with like real money, real consequences, with real people watching, I completely fell apart. Same person, totally different response. So that contradiction is what I wanted to understand and that's what really led to me writing Faceplant. So I set out to study failure in business, but I actually ended up with something much more personal. Why we can handle failure in some spaces and then are absolutely terrified in others. And that's the gap I wanted to close.
So there's a lot of things to unpack with what you just said there. So as a child, you grew up on a farm. More specifically, when you said, I was really curious about how things worked and you kept asking for things, was it more mechanical things? Was it philosophical, like how the world works? Like, or was it like tangible kind of things? Like, how does this tractor work? Or was it the animals and like, well, how's biology work? Or, was it something that related to engineering, or was it like in general, you just were always wondering like how everything works?
It was in general. So I might have philosophical conversations with my dad and, really, he was a deeply religious man. And so I would ask him all kinds of questions of a spiritual nature. And also, like, why is this weed called a weed and all kinds of things like that. So growing cycles and why he would plant with certain soil and why he would do crop rotation, all kinds of things.
So underneath your engineering degree and talents is a seeker. You're fundamentally a seeker. Like you want to
Right.
understand truth in all forms, like whatever that looks like. Like what's true in this situation? What's true in that situation? So it seems like in your early part of your career, like the discovery of truth, which is, the discovery of things that aren't true, or doesn't work, that was fine. What was different when you got into the workplace, like compared to what was the difference between the work environment and that type of thing and the lab? Like what was the shift? What made it different? A different kind of learning experience.
I think the biggest thing for me was that I think there were a couple things going on. So one is I took it personally, right? Like, okay, this is, I'm the one who's supposed to be successful and not mess up, right? So when I'm working in the lab, I know I'm going to build a model out of whatever data shows up. And it's going to be something that tells us which direction we go. So no matter what happens, I'm going to learn. I didn't have that same tool set or that same skill set in real life. And I think it may be related to, well, chances are it's related to having a fixed mindset in real life as opposed to a growth mindset when it came to like science and discovery and learning in the lab or in the classroom.
Well, and also like the risk factors are different too. I think that there's a difference. Like if I'm in the lab, like, well, that experiment failed, but I didn't fail. When you put
Right.
something out there in the world, like, well, it's not that this experiment failed, it's that I failed. Like, it's like it becomes an identity thing. Like, oh my God, am I a failure? Like, I think that's what a lot of consultants and coaches feel is like it's not a fear of like, okay, I go down this and I make a mistake, but it's like, well, what if I fail? And now am I going to be a failure? Because I've already gotten to this point somewhere in my career that I'm even making this change and I got a lot riding on it. And what if I fail rather than this fail?
Right, right. We oftentimes will collapse the outcome with our identity. And when that happens, there's a lot of really negative stuff that happens as a result of that. And it can really drag us down into an abyss.
So when you were trying to answer the question, like, did you have like one overarching question that was driving your research project? Was it like about like what's the difference between the lab and this environment, or did you have something more more specific to a research project, or was it more like I just want to see what evolves as you were doing research for the book?
It started out as really what's the difference between the lab and life? That's that was my motivation. And as it as it evolved, it became something completely different. And then it took on a much more personal nature, and it became what it became. I often think of like we start a project and it's or we start something, creating something, and it just takes on a life of its own.
Yeah.
So that's definitely what happened with this book.
So what was your research methodology, just out of curiosity? Like, I know that people are listening. It's like, why are you asking this? I'm like, I don't know. It's my show. I get to geek out on this. So I'm curious, like, how did you, was it more qualitative research? Was it more literature review? Like, what was your research process to come to identify your conclusions?
So I started out by reading. I had this fundamental question that, and I did a lot of exploration and reflection in my own self and my own experiences. So that was kind of what kicked it off. And then I read everything I could get my hands on about learning, about growth, about failure, about it didn't matter. Anything that even sounded like remotely relevant, I read it. And like if you look at my Goodreads over the period of time I was reading this, you'd see like over 100 books each year that I was just like absorbing. And then um once those I was through that process, then it was like, okay, let me start trying to put together what I know about all of this and what I've learned. And that's how it started. And then when I got asked my co-authors to come and join me in this process, it took on a completely different spin. They're like, okay, let's go and look at ourselves first. And so we started doing some really hard work on ourselves. We looked at our own failures. And I'll say one thing that really inspired me throughout all of this is Katie Anderson's book, Learning to Lead, Leading to Learn, because reading that book and seeing what Mr. Yoshino did with himself and his career completely inspired all three of us to look at our own lives. That
Mm.
was such a valuable resource for the three of us when we started down this process. We have a completely different book than Katie does, but it was so valuable in helping us open up and really be honest about the situations in our own life. And it got very, very personal very quick. We learned a lot about one another, and it was after we'd gone through this process and over and over and over with one another that we started working with other people and seeing the same things show up for them as well.
It seems like there's a close connection between your attitude towards learning and your attitude towards failure. Like if you're talking about like that's what I got out of working with Katie and some of the stuff with Mr. Yoshino. Like I was new to the lean field and operational excellence. Like I didn't really know anything about it. I come from an OD background, and all of a sudden, like I'm reading these testimonials of people going to Japan, and like I'm like crying. I'm like, they're so emotional. And it's like, I think that the emotionality around it, and I think that what is so different about lean, and why I hate the branding of lean because it does not really reflect this, is this like whole different kind of attitude, like that paint story, that about Mr. Yoshino's young career where he made a mistake, but everybody looked at it as a learning opportunity. And it's like that, there is such grace in that. Like it's such a graceful story because it's the learning that matters. And that's like, and I feel like that's what she's bringing it from, this learning component, and you're bringing it from the failure component, but it seems like it's two sides of the same coin.
It really does. And the way I look at it now, after all this research, is that I really see struggle and failure as a means to learning and growth. So if I'm struggling, if I'm failing, then I am learning. And so I've been able to flip the script, to use that phrase. I've been able to flip that and for myself and really open up my willingness to fail.
Are you talking like willingness to fail, like in the micro moments? Or are you saying like, I'm willing to take a big swing and the whole thing might be a total face plant? Like, is it both? Or is it because I think that some people might be listening and saying, I'm willing to fail. Like, I'll put a social post out, and if it's a bust, it's fine. Like, I'll put out a program. If nobody signs up, it's a bust. But to make a big commitment to go on this business path or something on a very personal level, like a big failure, like, well, what if I get divorced, or, like those bigger failures? So are we talking about, is it the same? Is this degrees of, like, how do you look at this?
So I think you've hit on a really good point, which is, with failure, it doesn't have to be an all or nothing type situation. It could really be, we could do micro experiments and still accomplish the same thing. So we can still do micro experiments to get to a place where we're learning and launching our business. It's not a one-time thing. And I lost my train of thought with your earlier question, so I apologize about that. What was your original question,
I think
Betsy?
It's like differentiating. Like when I think about like fears of failure, like there's the micro failures that we might have around like, I'm going to put like this program out there and that's a bust, like that's okay. Versus I'm going to put all my eggs in this basket and it's going to be a huge failure. Like the whole entity will fail, or I'll get divorced, or something like bigger. Like, are the lessons the same for both of them? Like, like just, it's like the opportunities for learning and growth. Is it for both, or is there nuances between, this is an experiment, I tried this and it failed and I get to have continuous learning, versus like the fear of like the big time failures, and I'm going to make a big life-changing mistakes, because on these little micro ones, you can fix them, like even if you spend money on something, you can get more money. You can't really get time back, or you can't really, save a relationship that like totally flopped, that, like some things are out of your control. Like, is the principle the same between both, or is there nuance?
Well, I think that one of the things that I've learned is that I don't approach life as a kind of one big giant pass or fail test anymore. Like that's not on my radar now. I treat whether it's a business launch or whether it's a some small thing that I'm trying one day, I treat those the same. Like there's some bounded experiment that I'm doing. And when I talk to people, it's really about running these small experiments, right? Like maybe if you've got somebody who's looking at launching a business, and maybe one thing they could do is keep their job, but take on one client to test one offer, see what happens. In the book, we talk about limiting the blast zone. So trying small experiments so that you can fail in small ways, learn quickly without having catastrophic consequences. So you don't have to bet the farm. You can test a small assumption at a time, and every experiment, whether it works or not, gives you data that you didn't have before.
I agree. I feel like there's this overall global thing though, is like when you're committed to a particular outcome, let's just say for sake of argument, like you wanted to write a book. So you have commitment to a book. And so like there's lots of things along the way. Like you don't know if it's, it's like you want it to be successful, you want it to sell, but whatever it takes along the way, you're going to stay committed down this path. Like when I think about like starting a business, as long as you have a continuous improvement mindset, your business will be successful because you put stuff out there in the market, see how's it respond, you tweak and adjust. And I think that there's like that kind of mindset, even while you're trying out these experiments, because sometimes those experiments, like the conditions aren't the same as if you were going in full time. But I think it is like that attitude of either one, like I want to go down this direction, it feels right for me, and I'm going to keep doing what it takes to make it work. And I will look at the micro failures along the way as really good insight. I don't know if that made sense.
Yeah. And, I think one thing that one of the things that we have developed in the book is something called the F.R.E.E. framework.
Okay, I
And
wanted to
I
ask you
actually,
about that.
so I think it's a really valuable tool, whether you've failed already or whether you're afraid of failing. If you use this framework, it can be really, really valuable. And so F.R.E.E., which I've mentioned it stands for focus, reflect, explore, engage. And focus is like, okay, something happens, and let's say you pitched a big engagement and they went with somebody else, or your brain immediately starts spinning like, oh, okay, I'm not good enough, or I should never have let corporate, or the whole thing was a mistake. But what we want to do is focus on like grabbing the steering wheel back and stop and say, okay, what actually happened? What happened is one prospect said no. That's all. That's all that happened. That's the fact. Everything else is our story that our fear is writing, that our fear is making up. And so the first step is really to separate those two. So before we can build anything useful. And then the next step is reflect. So when something happens and it's a threat or a failure or something that even the possibility of a failure, we go into autopilot mode. And it's really important to like spend time exploring what that autopilot is doing, what it's telling us. And it's only by looking at the patterns of our responses to failure and reflecting on those that we can start identifying them. And then we can start, it gives us options in the future. Engage is about, or explore, that's the next step, is really about getting curious instead of catastrophic. So you don't want to, what did I learn from this? You want to look at, okay, I can separate the facts from the story that I'm making about it. I've really looked at myself. I've looked at what's going on. And now I want to start looking at what I might learn from this. So maybe the pitch wasn't for the right client, or maybe
Yeah.
the positioning was off, or maybe it was just a timing thing. But you start asking better questions instead of spiraling. And when you get curious, you can look at what's possible now. And, not from a place of panic, because when your limbic system is engaged and your amygdala is completely hijacked, your prefrontal cortex can't engage. So it's only by getting your limbic system calmed down and your prefrontal cortex engaged that you can express and enjoy genuine curiosity. And then engage is taking one small step, one deliberate experiment, not a giant overcorrection or a giant over response to something. So, okay, we're not going to change our brand overnight, but do one small bounded experiment. Maybe
So it's
you rework your
focus.
pitch.
The F
Focus.
is focus, reflect.
Yes. Reflect.
Engage.
Explore.
Explore and experiment.
And then engage.
Oh, engage.
Engage.
Okay. Engage is the experiment.
Engage is the experiment. That's where you're doing one small thing. And
Okay, so it's focus, reflect, experiment, engage.
explore, and then engage.
Explore and engage. I don't know why I keep putting experiment. Maybe it's too many E's. Maybe it's
I want experiment there too.
Let's just add free. We'll add another E to it. Okay.
But
We'll
engage
just
is
add a
where
thing.
we're doing the experiment.
Okay. So what I heard you say many times in this explanation is the story we make up around failure. And I wonder if that is the difference between the lab and life, is that in the lab, you don't have any stories that you're making up about failure. But in life, we make up stories about failure. So the freeing yourself is to take on the story that we're making up about it so that we could actually observe the experiment of whatever actually is. And that's how we're going to be able to learn from it. And it's almost like we need to have that same curiosity without the story in life in order for the life failures, or what is perceived life failures, to actually, do the teaching that it's meant to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, and part of the reason that's difficult, and this was a revelation to me. So part of the reason that's difficult is that there's so many emotions that are associated with failure. They're, blame, shame, anxiety, all kinds of things, and they don't feel good. And that's why that's the funk of failure that we talk about. And when we're feeling those emotions, that makes it a little more difficult for us to start thinking about what's possible in our lives. And if we took those things personally in the lab, it would be the same thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm a complete failure because I, ran this experiment. But because in the lab, I knew I was building a model which would completely describe the process space. Like it didn't matter really that some of the experiments would fail. Even 90% of them could fail, but I'd still have a model. And I didn't have that same framework in life. And now I keep an experimental journal. So, okay, I'm going to try this. Well, that didn't work. All right, let me try this. Okay, well, that didn't work. But I go through the free cycle, this free framework with each experiment, and I'm looking at like I'm disassociating or detaching the emotions from it. And yeah, it still stings. Like, oh, I didn't get that one right. Okay, well, let me try again. But it's never not going to sting because we care.
I wish I would have had your free model a long time ago. So when I'm thinking about like my biggest face plant is when I was actually pivoting my business from consulting to what I'm doing now. So I was an organizational consultant. And so I had a Disney background and I did a lot of internal consulting and I started my consulting business and it was sort of like gun to my head because I got divorced and I had to get like a business going. And, 5 years in, I was making money, but it wasn't the right one. And I knew I wanted to pivot, but I didn't know how. Like I didn't know how to let go of all of this consulting background. I kind of knew I wanted to work with individuals and I always had this passion for branding and messaging and positioning and all the stuff I do now, but I didn't really have words for it. I didn't trust it. And so I had this in-between period where I was trying to make something and anything work. So I'm like, I'm going to like create a course where I'm going to monetize my OD best practices and try to sell that. And I'll never forget, I went up to Ohio where my web guy was who was helping me with it. And he was like, so what's your passion? I'm like, I don't know. I just want this thing to sell. And he's like, but yeah, but what's your passion behind it? I'm like, I don't know. I just want passive revenue. I just want us to have these. I just want this to sell. And he's like, well, we all have our failures. And I'm like, oh, that's like an interesting pep talk as I'm getting ready to do 2 days worth of videos, but he was right. It failed, but then it didn't fail. Like I spent way too much money. Like I spent way, way, way too much money. It cost me a lot. And it really kind of forced me to this like reckoning because I was trying to sell these things while I was keeping my consulting business going. I was confusing the market. And, because it kind of got my results to where it was, it kind of failed. It didn't, because that's when I started really listening to the market. So I kind of think I did do the free model because I didn't have a choice. I had to focus and say, okay, what's not working here? And I had to reflect on, why am I straddling the fence here? Because it's like, I wanted to move in this direction, but, I'm like dragging this consulting identity along, so I had to reflect on that one. And then I had to, really like come up with like, what is the different direction? But I had to listen, I was listening to what the market was saying. And I'm like, oh, good news. What the market wants is what I want to give them. And so then I did cut off my consulting business. I did cut off that other part. And I started to really, do these experiments, moving into this new direction. But it was only because everything kind of went to crap that I ever would have moved forward into what I do now that I love. And it's like my mission, what my med2 business is. I never would have got there if it wasn't that fail in the middle. And the reality is all those training that I created, I just, it didn't work in that container. So I released them all and put them on YouTube, made them free, and, built SEO and other ways. So it all kind of served, but it never would have gotten there if it didn't go to the face plant. Like if I did not get to that part. And I wonder, like, is there sometimes where so this is a long story. So there's 2 questions in that one is, the first one is sometimes does it require things to get to a face plant level? Like this is like, AA people would say like, you got to hit rock bottom. Like, is there sometimes we just have to get there and on the bigger changes that we need to do? And then I have a follow-up question on that one. But is that actually the follow-up question after that one is curiosity, the reflection, really the key skill set in all of this? The curiosity and the reflection. So those are my 2 questions. Do we have to make it bad? And is curiosity and listening the path out of whatever it might be to get to from the failure to the learning?
I think there has to be some struggle and failure for us to learn. And one of the things we talk about is the learning curve in the book, which is the learning curve that we all go through when we're really learning lessons. And now, does it have to be as deep as, oh, my business failed? Or like for me in my own life, the first startup I joined completely failed within a year. And then I started my own business and I was like, okay, I'm not going to be afraid. I'm going to jump in there. And it was like, I just didn't have a safety net, nothing. And it completely failed again. And so then it was like, okay, I need to take some time and really reflect on this. And so the next time I started an entrepreneurial business, I was a very, very different person. And so I think that we do have to learn things. Now, does it require that we go bankrupt or that no, it may be other things that have us learn, but I think we do have to experience some things in order to really learn. And to answer your second question, reflection, I am finding that reflection is the key to so much in life. We really learn more from reflection, like it solidifies everything for us. And if we could get to where we're doing smaller experiments, having smaller failures, and reflecting and learning from that, codifying that into really something valuable and strong, and then doing the next experiment, like what a great way to progress through life. And it's when we ignore them, let them accumulate. Oh, well, okay, that didn't work, I'm just going to ignore it. That didn't work, I'm just going to ignore it. And then they start piling up. That's
Yeah.
when we get into a lot of trouble.
Like it's the replacing the fight or flight with the more reflective kind of approach of saying, all right, like what are some good habits of reflection? Like if something happens, is there a certain tips on how to reflect, or certain questions like beyond like, oh, what did I learn from this? Like what are some tips around reflection that you would have?
So for me personally, and I think for a lot of people, I relied heavily on James Pennebaker's work, expressive writing, and the tool that he uses. And some people prefer talking to other people, but for me, it was around writing, and old-fashioned pen and paper. And sometimes it was with a prompt, like a focused question, like, what did I do wrong? And other times it was just like I just needed to sit there and write whatever was coming up and not judge it, not grade it, not worry about punctuation or spelling, just write. And it was through these exercises that I really learned. And frankly, if you look at the research that Pennebaker did over and over, you see that with expressive writing, people recover from failures, from setbacks so much faster. And they get to the other side where they're in a much better place a lot faster.
Is that the same thing as journaling or automatic writing or like what Julia Cameron does of like the writing pages? Like, are all they the same or is there something specific about what he's saying in terms of expressive writing?
And I don't know the details of the other people's work that you've mentioned, so it's hard for me to compare. But with his writing, one of the things that he talks about is, just express what you're feeling, express what's real for you right now, get it out onto paper.
Yeah. I'm a huge journaler and I feel like that's the way I can access like I don't know, the higher part of myself,
Mhm.
I don't know, like when you get in a mode of writing, it's like sometimes it's like, am I writing or am I receiving? It's like, it's like if you write long enough, it's like, am I scribing this or am I actually writing this? Like, because now I have like the wisdom, but it takes a little bit to kind of get into that mode and and you have to have like some degree of courage, I think, to get into that reflective space, is so that because it's really like looking backwards. The word reflect is like looking backwards twice. Like and it takes a lot of courage, I think, and a willingness to, go within. And I think a lot of people are nervous about that. Like what tips would you have for somebody who it's like like self, like being with myself or seeing myself in that way? is so challenging for me. How would
It
what would you encourage them with?
it really is. And so one of the research studies that I read was that we would rather receive electric shock than reflect. It is
Gosh.
it is like I was surprised, and at the same time I was like, "Oh yeah, well, I've got this big thing going on, and when I sit down, what I do is I create my to-do list rather than reflective writing." Or, like I would do anything to avoid reflecting on that particular thing that I was dealing with. And so yeah, it's not a comfortable thing, but I think we have to get in the practice of it, and the more we do it, the easier it becomes, and the more second nature it becomes. And when we wait and it's some big thing that's going on, then it is harder to jump into reflection.
It feels like when you're talking about reflection in this way, like the image that I have in my mind is like something external outside of me. Like it failed, it feels out of control. But when I reflect, I take my power within. Like it just like I'm visualizing like this feels like crazy and I'm taking this power and putting this like spotlight within and it's within and now I have the power to move forward in a different sort of way. Like you become empowered through this practice is what I'm visualizing as you're talking. I don't know if that feels like what
Absolutely,
you're saying.
absolutely. Yeah, so you're looking at who you are in the process of all this stuff that's going on. And like getting to that real piece is so valuable and so important. Um yeah, I can't express enough how valuable reflection really is in the learning process.
So I just wasn't expecting a us to wind up in this place, but you're making me think about a recent challenge I'm observing in my clients. So a lot of my brand positioning work is requires a lot of reflection. Like I have my clients at the beginning, really listen to their life and really kind of unpack like what's inside there, like what's not working today so that they can identify what they want moving forward and, tap into their passions of what's driving them. But I've noticed a trend since like AI has become of a bigger thing in our lives. And my biggest worry, I think, about AI is what you're talking about here is that when you journal, you have access to your higher self, your own power. When I feel like when you go to AI, it's like you're accessing something outside of you rather than within. And it feels like these patterns of reflection or these habits of reflection are being threatened. And I think that's why I have like I just did a couple podcasts on AI. I think that's my biggest concern about it is that we lose that thing about what it means to be human. I think that that's the essence of being human is this ability, and I'm worried about it. I don't know if you're worried about it, but I'm seeing this as a major challenge. Like I'm seeing my clients having less tolerance for that inner work than even a year ago then I've noticed that there's less tolerance. I don't know if I'm just observing it, it's just this latest, I'm just experiencing that. Are you seeing that and is that a concern that you might have as well?
I Yes, so I have been seeing a lot more disconnection between our humanity and and embracing AI a lot more. And I I I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn, and one of the things that is really important for me is to bring that humanity back to LinkedIn. And so I the stories I write about, the things I talk about, they're very, very human oriented, very leadership heavy, and it focuses on the human side of things and how we develop as humans, and rather than on the, learning more about AI. So I don't have AI tutorials. I have things that talk about leadership. And I think um, I'm seeing that a lot where people are letting AI take over. And unfortunately, you can see it when that happens. And it's sad because it really disconnects us from who we are and who we are with one another.
And the superpower that you just mentioned around like really the failure resistance technique or the failure resilience technique is this reflection. Because that's like, it seems like that's the key element in the free model is focus and reflect. Like that's the linchpin. And if you can't do that, then then we're going to miss out on this skill set that is really transformational in so many ways. Not just like getting resilience from failure, but just this other thing about like being more empowered as a human, having higher wisdom, having access to your prefrontal cortex and not letting the stories that you might make up about things take over. It all comes from this superpower. And it's like we can't cut ourselves off from this thing that we could have. But I think it does take courage. Like what did you say people would rather get shocked? Like what did you say
Right.
that they
Yes.
would rather get?
People would rather have electric shock than reflect, than spend time in reflection.
That's
Yes,
crazy. Or I
it
mean, it's not
is.
crazy. It can kind of make sense.
It does make sense when you think about it, but it's like, well, really? Yeah.
So it's like it's really a courageous act then is to say, if I'm going to reframe my understanding of failure and I'm going to reframe my whole understanding of seeing life as a lab and I'm going to apply this free model, it's really this act of courageous rebellion around like I'm going to take on these crazy stories that my brain and the society wants to make up about what my choices are. Is if I take a big swing and it didn't work, instead of it, the society and our brain might say I'm a failure rather than I'm a risk taker. Like I'm a big swing taker. Like that's a much more empowering belief than it is like I'm a failure. So it seems like that's the big thing is like we got to use this pattern of reflection to fight off this bad narrative that's going to keep us from moving forward.
Definitely, definitely. And, I think the other thing that's really important in all of this is find your people who have this same belief. And so they take chances. They're willing to learn and grow. And so if we surround ourselves with people who aren't taking chances, they're very safe, like, okay, I'm not going to do anything that takes a chance. I'm not doing any risk taking. Then that's where we're going to be. And we're going to seem to be the most dangerous person in our social network. But if we surround ourselves with people who are learning and growing, experimenting and taking chances and spending time in reflection, those are the people that are going to help us grow and encourage us to grow. And we won't seem like the outlier in that network. So I think it's really important to have people in your corner and people who will support you in this, not people who are going to be just yes, yes, yes for everything you do, but really challenge you and help you grow and develop.
But what I love about how you talked about with your book and your approach to writing your book is it doesn't sound like you did it from, I want to have these ego reasons where I have to like my ego's attached to the success of my book. I mean, what I heard from the beginning is the same child on the farm is like, I'm just curious. I want to figure out how this works. So the question drove you. And so the question is and then the answer to your question is what you want to put forth. That will never fail. Like, it's like, I think that there's sometimes where we put goals out there that do have the pass fail. Like you said, life is no longer pass fail. But I think sometimes we put goals out there that is the pass fail because it's like it's an ego driven type of thing rather than like how's your book's never going to fail because first off you were the first reader, like so you and your partners and the co-writers like it was satisfying enough for you like to get an answer. So for sure there's good, better and best. Like worst case scenario, like that's going to work. Next level is like, well, the handful of people around you, and maybe it will become a bestseller. But I'm not sensing that you're putting your sense of what the book's success is it's got to be a bestseller and it's got to make X number of dollars. Like, it's right sizing also the goal and letting, I think that is also part of the failure resistance is, why are you doing it? What's the purpose?
Yeah. So I will tell you that my experiment with writing, because this is my, if you count my master's thesis and PhD thesis, like this is the fifth book I've written. And my goal with each thing that I write is to have a few more people read it, a few more people, and that's successful. So if I can reach more people, and I think now, am I committed to this being as successful as possible and reaching as many people as possible? Absolutely. This is, I think, the free model and the free framework, and this book, Faceplant, has the potential to really change people's lives. So I'm really passionate about being visible and staying out in front and talking about this message. And that's really hard for me as an introvert, but I'm committed to doing it because I think it could make people's lives different and really have a positive effect.
And I feel like that goal will definitely be achieved. Like that's, like it's 1,000%. Like I think that's the intention. I think sometimes it's like it's the intention versus like an external goal. Like the goal is I want to have this message out there because I want to have people's lives change. And so it's
Right.
already going to be a success, and it's going to continue. I think sometimes like people are like, oh, I want to write a book because I want to elevate, this. And I don't know what the book should be about. And I don't really care, as long as it just elevates my positioning. It's like, well, then you're putting the pass fail rather than like passion is leading me or service to the world. And it's like, yeah, I want to help more people. Like why would we do our work why would we do what we do if it wasn't to help people? And so helping more people is better than helping less people because if you really believe in what you're doing. But I think that there's a difference. Like you're always going to be successful if you put, it takes out the pass fail equation from life is passions leading, and then the results will follow rather than letting the results be the outcome. And it seems like also it's just the opportunity to like be around other people. Like what I loved about, I've been working with Katie on her book. And what I love about what she does is she's all out there of the book idea in process. Like she's sharing the book idea as it's evolving. So we're working on our next book and the book idea is evolving. And so she'll put the idea out there. She's not being precious about it. It's not like I have to have this. It's like I just want to get a good idea. And I think that's also must be part of the experimentation. I think we should put another E in this. I feel like the free model needs an experiment in its own E. I if I humbly can submit to you and your co-writers, can we make it be free and just experiment?
Well, I think there was a little bit reluctance on the E being experiment because we had one person who wasn't a scientist in this, and she was like, "Okay, well, let's hold off on that." So the engage it captures it. So yeah, I think that what I love about what Katie's doing and reaching out to in her new book is reaching out to people and really having all of us involved in the process of writing this, and she's taking all of our learnings and all of our experiences and really putting those together in this book. I think that's a really valuable way to do this. And we did something similar with a failure survey and really collecting failure stories. We ended up using our own failure stories primarily because we wanted to keep it a very personal work. But yeah, I think what Katie's doing is really valuable, collecting the reflections of everybody in the community.
And I think that that's where you like have the balance of like, okay, I'm going to synthesize all of this, put an idea forward, But I think what I love about, like, even as you were talking about yours, it's the question, answering the question and putting forth an idea that will make a difference for other people, is the driver. And so, like, in terms of like the things that we talked about today, it's like there's a lot of stuff about, like just the ongoing curiosity that you had from the time that you were very young to what led you to this particular research project is like, how do you take the lab to life and what's the difference between the two? Seems like the big issue of what is between the two is this whole idea around like the story that we make up around failure when it comes to the personal side in the life versus the lab. And we have to like get rid of the story so we can go back to the lab. That's where the free model comes in. The superpower is the reflection out of the whole, like the whole model is like, it really begins with reflection and turning it into like, what can I learn from this? Like that's what we want to do. And if we could do that, then it's like our curiosity in life being a learning journey, like really like reframing our whole time here on earth from, into like, we're just here on earth school, and that's what we're here to learn. I think creates that whole, I feel like that might be the deeper meaning. Maybe when you're on the farm talking to your dad about his religious, perspective, maybe it was like life's just a big learning lesson. I don't know. But it seems like that's the through line is if I can learn from it, I can grow from it, and the way I'm going to grow from it is to reflect on it and take on that story that would make me not want to, take on that story of like from it failed to I'm a failure.
Right,
I don't
right.
know if
And
that sounded correct in terms of a summary.
yeah, I think you're bringing up a really good point is that when we're dealing with failure, it's actually a skill. So it's not a personality trait that we're born with. It's a skill that we can develop. And we can learn it, we can practice it, and we can get better at it. And I think that's what the free framework allows us to do. It gives us a framework to practice, and then we can learn from that. And the more we practice it, the more we engage, experiment, the easier it gets. Yeah.
Awesome. I would love to. I have a million other questions, but I know we got to be sensitive to time. Can you share where can people buy your book? Where can people connect with you? Give us all those deets.
Okay. So first of all, Faceplant is available at all the major booksellers, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, bookshop.org, all of those. And I am available on LinkedIn. You can find me there. Love engaging with people and talking to you and learning more. So, and my website has additional resources that are also available, melisabuie.com.
And it's
And
Buie, correct? And
right. So it's
one L, not two L's.
yes, and one S. So melisabuie.com. Yes. Yeah.
So is there anything else that you want to tell me about Faceplant or about reframing failure? And I'm just not asking you the right questions.
I think the big point that we just talked about, which was the fact that failure is a skill. So learning from failure is a skill that we can develop, is a really valuable tool for people, or really a valuable walk away from today's discussion. And that I hope that's what people learn from Faceplant as well, is that it's something that we can learn. And there's so much more in the book. I wish we had time to cover it all, but yeah, that's a big one.
Because it does go along with vulnerability. And one of the best definitions I heard about vulnerability is the end of it has ability in it, which means that there's a skill set, like it's a skill set that you can learn. And it's something that you could get better over time. Like even if like patterns of reflection and having habits of reflection, like you could learn to do that. You mentioned a book that people can get to learn develop those habits. And yes, it might feel scary like getting electrical shock treatment and all, but what's the alternative? Living a small life and never really taking a risk. Like it seems like that there's a lot of good opportunities there. Well, thank you so, so, so much for being on today's episode. I learned a lot. I'm really excited to implement 𝗲/, more in my regular life. I'm adding the experiment one because I like that one,
Okay.
as well as engage. Like I like engage too, but I like experiment because it makes it feel like going back to the lab. Like I like the idea of applying the lab mindset to things that you're doing. I think it depersonalizes it in a lot of ways. So.
I love it.
That was super helpful. For all of you who are listening, definitely check out Melisa's book and her website. Lots of great stuff. There's so much here. I'm so excited to had this conversation. So thank you all so much for being on the show. Or not being on the show, you're not all on the show. If you guys want to be on the show, you could be on the show. But anyway, if you enjoyed the show, please rate and review it so more people can find it. And subscribe, of course, as always, so you don't miss future episodes. And until next time, thanks so much for listening. And thank you, Melisa, for being here.
Thank you.